again, everyone, for standing by, and welcome to today's Tivoli User Community Ask the Expert series. In today's session, our expert speaker, Krishna Kadali, will discuss IBM Tivoli Network Manager High Availability Functional Walkthrough. Today's webcast is an interactive presentation, so you may ask a question anytime using the chat window located in the control panel. And today's session is being recorded, and you'll be provided a copy of today's materials following the call. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Krishna. Take it away.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Krishna Kadali. So today's session will walk through the high availability / failover for ITNM version 4.1.1 only, because there are key differences between the previous version and this version. So this presentation is limited to 4.1.1 exclusive. So the agenda will be, we'll see the architecture for the 4.1.1, and we'll do the configuration walkthrough, what are the steps involved when doing the failover setup for 4.1.1. And we'll talk through the health channel, what is the health channel, and then the data flow, which is also a data channel, how the data flows from primary to the backup. And then actual functional walkthrough, what does the primary ITNM does when it is acting as a primary. And then we'll look at the limitations and other reference material that you may review at later time. So in 4.1.1, if you want to have a really high available architecture, the ideal setup would be 6 server. It doesn't matter what size of network you may have, even if it is a medium or a large scale. Ideally, you should go with the 6 servers. If a hardware requirement is a constraint, then probably you can limit that to 4 server based on what you have. So the 2 servers are exclusive for ITNM core components, one acting as a primary, one as a backup. 2 database servers. If you are on a DB2, that can be on a 2 server with either header, high availability disaster recovery using a DB2 or Oracle RAC. That can be 2 or more servers, depending on how many domains you may have. And the tip can be on 2 different server too. In 4.1.1, even in the previous versions, ITNM does not support the load balancing feature. What it means is they can be part of the cluster. You can join them as a cluster, but the changes you make on the primary, they won't be passed on to the backup, and vice versa. And during the upgrade of ITNM exclusively for the GUI components, you have to break the cluster, you have to disjoin it and do the upgrade of ITNM, and you can rejoin them. That's how it is in the current design. You might have seen we have NSIM failover, they used to call NSIM replication, which means a primary can talk to the primary NSIM, a backup can talk to the backup NSIM. That is no longer supported in 4.1.1 onwards. The reason being we are going with the native database replication option rather than the homegrown ITNM native method. This seems to work well, and that's a better option anyway. So for this presentation, the naming convention is I created the primary domain as a primary 4.1.1. So is for backup 4.1.1, the virtual domain name, and object server name as so and so. And the NSIM database is called MyWish. The assumptions are you have done with the database setup as well as the ITNM core component setup, and also the GUI component installation. And these slides are prepared based on standalone NSIM DB instance. It was not part of the header. I'll walk through the configuration. So in order to set up the failover ITNM on the primary, and this is the first step you would want to do it, it's fairly simple compared to the previous versions. You would touch this one file and you define the primary domain name and the backup domain name as listed in those boxes, right? And you would say failover enable equal to 1. And you also define the object server name that is ITNM is going to connect to. It can be a virtual pair or a standalone object server. That's the step number 2 you would do on the primary, and then you would create a a tunnel, the port defined for the data flow that you do by starting NCP virtual domain process on the primary that will create an entry in service-data.cfg file. Once that the process is started, you can stop that once the entry is made to that file. And then you would do the third step. From here onwards, all these steps are optional. But ideally, I would prefer if you are a medium-scale customer. When I say medium, what it means is your domain size is approximately 200,000 or higher, the number of entities. If you are that range, I would recommend you go with at least a 3-polar setup. You can look at the, when you point to the monitoring best practice guide, it talks about how to set up the polars and what should be assigned to what. In terms of, we have one admin polar and the rest all are actual monitoring polars. In this case, I have 3 polars. One is exclusively for ICMP, another one is exclusively for SNMP, and I made the default polar as the admin polar. The admin polar typically does caching the network views, and also it does the other activity within the in terms of adaptive polling. And these optional steps, step number 3 and 4 and 5 goes together. You can't just do one and ignore the rest. When you have defined the additional polars, you also need to define them in the control services.cfg file within your primary domain, so that they know they need to be part of the control service. And as you can see here, the option is -no admin when you define this polar service. What it means is it is not taking that overhead of the caching the network views and whatnot. And you also need to define within the control services all those additional polars you registered so that they are part of the virtual domain process and they are part of your failover. So until all polars are up and running, your virtual domain process will not come up, which is a key component to keep the primary and backup in sync. So in step number 5, this is also optional. So you need to extend the virtual domain schema to monitor those additional polars you created. So you add those SNMP only and ICMP only polars, or whatever the name you call it, in that particular schema file. And last but not least, typically you would want to define a polling station within your event gateway schema. Most of the customers do have a connectivity from ITNM servers to the rest of the topology, what they discover. Some customers, they don't. And in fact, ITNM server isn't even part of their Discover topology. In such case, you need to pick up either a switch or a router that is as your starting point that can act as a polling station. What it means is we calculate the AMOS or RCA graph using that polling station as a start point. So you can define that IP address or host name in the event gateway schema, and in such case you want to keep it consistent. So this file is copied anyway to the backup unless the ITNM servers are part of your topology. So it is recommended that you can create a domain-specific schema files rather than you modifying the domain-less files. For example, here are the common customization typically customers do. The NCO gate inserts. You add a lot of new trap or syslog event IDs that are not part of the out-of-the-box, right? And class schemas. Sometimes you may have a new vendor devices or some other vendor we haven't properly classified. You want to add your own class name to those devices. Or the model schema, which is if you are modifying the linger time out of the box, the default linger time is 3. If you are modifying it to the higher value, or within this same file you have some other parameters, such as if you want to avoid the duplicates within the topology, there are some parameters that you can define here. So if you have any of those customized settings, you better do the domain-specific file. So it would be easy to track it. And so is the case for model NSIMDB. This is when you're trying to enrich the topology or when you're having a failover object server setup. You would define the name within this particular file. And the event gateway schema is typically you define the polling station or some other customizations you may have as part of your event enrichment and RCA results. That completes the primary steps in terms of the configuration. So when you come to the backup, typically when you do the installation, what happens is it will ask you to define a domain name, and you define whatever you call, say XYZ, whatever it may be. You define the domain name, the domain gets added. When you are making that specific server as part of the failover, the first step you need to do is you need to drop the domain and some of the leftovers that will leave. So the first step here is use the domain drop Perl script to drop the domain from the database. But what happens is it doesn't remove any configuration and the cache files if you have run the discovery on that server. So you need to remove those as well. And the last one is you also need to remove the key, the configuration key, which uses the AES algorithm to encrypt your passwords. That is specific to that host because we're going to copy the key from the primary host in order to keep the configuration in sync. If you are trying to make everything unencrypted, there is an option that you can turn it off. I have referred a 3.9 high availability slides at the bottom, a link. You can review that if you want more details on how to disable encryption altogether for entire ITN. And as a second step, once you drop the domain, you copy the login files. So the majority of the DB logins and MIPDB logins. That tells ITNM core components how to connect to the NSIM database. And you also copy the conf.key, which is host specific. That is why you copy this file, so you are able to decrypt the passwords that are defined in the DB logins and so forth. And the last one is NCO login. This is optional, but it is needed if you are running the object server in a secure mode or SSL mode. So, and then the step number 3 is whatever the TCP socket connection that was created as a result of virtual domain startup, you copy that line from primary to the backup, service data or CFG. And the fourth step is you edit the control services. Because we don't run the discovery on the backup, we remove the NCP disco process from that list. And we also made NCP disco as a dependent process for NCPG event in 4.1.1. This is because of post-NSIM processing. If you have multiple domains, if you are doing a cross-domain RCA, this is needed there. And you want to remove this dependency from your backup control services. Otherwise, gateway will not come up. So once you completed those 4 steps, you start the backup domain and you restart it. Once you sync up, the backup will connect to the primary and you will see a lot of events coming in with the event ID as ITNM configuration. You would want to review those events if you don't care about the AEL, and then what you can do is you can look at the actual backend via CLI, command line interface mode, and see what are the primary files that are copied from the primary to the backup ITNM server. And at a minimum, you want to rename these files in the boxes to the backup name. This is a manual effort, and this is not done automatically. The config files are copied from primary to the backup, and renaming you would do manually. So these are the list of directories we try to keep in sync between the primary and backup. This wasn't there in 3.9 earlier fix packs, but this got added in fix pack 4 onwards, and this is out of the box in 4.1.1. So we try to keep as much as configuration props where it is relevant to keep the primary and backup in sync. They will be copied as a primary domain name extension. You need to rename them to the backup, and then as a last step, you would remove any existing cache file on the backup domain, because if you have customized any AOC files, right, the class name may be different between the primary and backup before step number 8. So before you kicking off, after you make all the changes, before you kicking off the backup process, you want to delete the cache files so the backup is completely 100% in sync with the primary. That completes the ITNM core, the configuration. But when it comes to tip, you don't have to do much because both, if you have multiple tip servers, both will be talking to the same NSIMDB instance. They won't be talking to two different NSIM instances. You can make the changes from any tip instance in terms of enabling the poll policies or disabling policies or creating, no, not the creating network views. If you want to kick off a discovery from any tip server, you can do that. And if you want to make any discovery configuration changes, you can do from any tip instance. And the only caveat is that the network views, this can be done only from one tip instance because there is a dynamic network view engine which we want to turn it off on all the tip servers except on one instance. If we have this, by default, this is enabled. What it means is you will have a auto provisioning templates. When this dynamic view engine is turned on, we create these out-of-the-box views. You don't want to have duplicate set of views because of multiple tip instances. You want to turn them off on other instances. You can read the some of the network views best practices guide and also some of the tricks and tips when using multi-tip server setup. By the way, this is same in 3.9 as well as in 4.1.1. At the end of all these steps you have followed through, when you log into the GUI, either the discovery configuration or poll policies or the network views or hop views, the drop-down domain option should only give you a primary domain name. It should never list the backup domain. If it is listing both, means you haven't followed some of the steps I outlined before. A lot of time customers ask, why I'm seeing this backup? That means you haven't dropped your backup domain or your primary and backup are not in sync at all. Okay, that completes the configuration. So we'll talk about the health channel. So when it comes to the failover, so we have the data channel and health channels. Health channel operates completely independent of the data channel. But the monitoring effects based on the health of the system. I have copied this diagram from the documentation because it is detailed pretty nicely, so I don't need to redo the diagram work. So every 60 seconds, the NCP virtual domain process raises a health event for its own domain. Both primary and backup does it. You can change this interval if you feel like. Events are processed by the gateways on both the primary and backup. They touch the events of primary as well as backup health events. And once they know your domain is healthy, it will send an alert at the event gateway back to the virtual domain saying update your health status for this domain and keep it as healthy. And if they don't see the alerts for 5 long minutes, it will send a health status as 0 for the specific domain. So it is important that the health events keep coming in every 60 seconds. And the failover, failback happens as long as if they don't see the alert within that failover time frame. The default is 300 seconds. So far, in the past experience, so far I've seen every time you have a the failover, failback issue means your health channel is broken for some reason. It can only happen mainly because of 2 scenarios. One is you modified the event gateway schema, which is the gateway that touches the health events, not to process those events, or you did some customization that is preventing processing that health events, or you modified the ITNM probe rules where the node name should be the either primary domain name or backup domain name. You are modifying one of that. So make sure you don't touch the health events. As long as you keep them intact, it should be fine. In 4.1.1, they made a little exclusive section for health events. So you can keep your customization somewhere else. You don't need to interfere with the ITNM health check section at all. Okay, that completes the health channel and this data channel. The discovery is done on the primary core server. The discovery is not run on the backup. The discovery data is sent to the NCP model process. The data is sent using a message bus, which is a nano broker. It used to be Rendezvous in 3.9 and earlier versions. Actually, 3.8 and earlier versions. I take that back. So, and the data is sent from model to NSIM database, and then the data is broadcast to NCP virtual domain process. The virtual domain process sends via that tunnel that you define in the service data.cfg to the backup virtual domain process. And that in turn pass the data to NCP model on the backup. The backup model broadcasts the data to Polar and gateways. And so is the case in the primary. Primary model broadcasts the data to Polar and gateways. And finally, NCP store also consumes that broadcast, and NCP store writes to the physical disk on the both ITNM primary as well as the backup server. It's actually not model that is writing to the disk. It is actually NCP store that writes to the disk. The data flow is always disco to model and then model to store. It's never to disco to model. But when you stop the domain, for any reason, when you bring it back up with the existing cache, at that time model reads from NCP store, but not as a result of discovery. The backup domain never writes the data to the NSIM because it's always a read-only mode there. So how do we check the backup and primary are in sync in terms of what we have on the primary versus backup? Typically, we keep on the primary, if I go back to the previous slide, we keep 5 sets of topology on the primary. One is in the discovery and also the DNSIM. And second one is model. Third one is the store. And the fourth one is the gateway. And the last one is NSIM database. So we typically keep 5 sets of topology for various reasons. On the backup, you only have in the model, store, and a gateway. So in each and every location, the data need to be in sync. So whatever the discovery process is sending into model, if you do a count on the how many number of chassis you have, how many number of interfaces you have, that should match pretty much everywhere. You query the store or gateway or the NSIM database. They should all match up. And then when you query the actual NSIM database, the number of chassis and the interfaces should match up, as I've shown in this on the very bottom diagram there, the chassis count and interface count. But if you look the overall, the total number of entity count for this domain is 6,500. What are those leftover 1,205 entities that are not chassis and interfaces? We have various types of entities. They are logical, and depending on the technology that you have within your network, we generate a lot of those logical objects. If you look at the list here, if you run that query, that talks about a list of all entity types you have and how many are there. And if you combine all of it, that brings the total of 6,500. Like I said, this entity count should match everywhere. When we say the domain size, this is what we are referring. When people talk about the domain should be limited to 500,000 entities, the entity count here is the number we are referring to. It's a combination of chassis, interfaces, and logical objects. Okay, that completes the data channel. When it comes to the ITNM, the functional walkthrough, the real reason for ITNM product is it does the event correlation based on the Discover topology. That's the key aspect. So the discovery need to be very accurate. So what we keep as part of the failover is the monitoring and event management system. That is pollers and the event gateway that does both event enrichment as well as RCA. That is kept in a high available mode, but not discovery engine. As you can see here, the pollers read the data from various schemas within NSIM database, and it sends the alert to the probe. The alerts are sent to the object server, and gateway enriches the events, and it also has RCA plugin that does the event correlation based on the topology it has within the memory. So how do you know which domain is acting as a primary versus which domain is acting as a backup? You can run a query against virtual domain to see who is acting as a primary. I've listed a couple of queries. So you can see what is the role of the each domain. M_backup equal to 1. That means that domain is domain is itself is a backup domain, and the health status of each domain and who is acting as a primary, and so forth. So when it comes to polar, you can pretty much do the same thing. If you want to see what is the actual failover status within the polar, if you don't like to do the command line mode, you can always look at the GUI at the AEL list and see who is acting as a primary. If you see the both alerts, primary being healthy, backup being healthy, and primary automatically acting as a primary there. But if you want to go and explore a little more on the backend, you can run these commands. So when you run the query on the polar for the config.failover table, it has a ready state and a failover attributes. The failover attribute talks about when the value is 1, that means it failed over, and the backup is probably acting as a primary. We do have the ready state. What it means is it possesses 3 values, 0 and 1 and 2. 0 is the polar is up, but it isn't doing any polling. But when the value is 1 means it has sent the SQL queries based on the poll policy and definition that you have for the polar that are active, but it is still not ready. 2 means we have done the scope evaluation based on the SQL queries, and we are done with the first pass. That means it can do the polling right away. This was introduced as part of that APAR IV that number. That's because we had a customer where the NSIM database is sitting on a different time zone and different region than their ITNM core applications. So the startup time was taking a little longer than a few minutes because it has to connect across the WAN. The failover time, when it comes to it, is only 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. If the primary goes down, the backup takes over, but the backup really doesn't do any polling until this polar is ready, or vice versa when it fails back. So we don't want the virtual domain to take over until it gets the heartbeat from the polar saying it is ready. So that way, when it fails back, we are waiting for entire process to be up and running and ready for monitoring. When the backup is acting as a primary, you could see the failover state equal to 1 in the very bottom diagram here. For the event gateway, it is the same drill. You have the config.failover table. It has only 1 parameter. Compared to previous versions of ITNM, and 3.9 and later versions, we introduced a plugin concept. So the RCA is a plugin. It's no longer run as a process for gateway. We have multiple plugins here. Some customers who are not using each and every feature of this, you can probably disable some of the plugins. For example, adaptive polling. When you enable this plugin, what it does is it pulls all the data from the object server and writes into NC monitor.active event table. So it's the same IDOC cycle. The IDOC cycle is defined in the event gateway schema every 5 seconds. So all the changes and everything is propagated between object server and NSYM. Today, some customers do have a very large number of standing events, for example, 70,000 or 50,000. So, and if you are not using adaptive polling, it's not worth having this option enabled. You may want to turn it off. That would save memory and resources both on the gateway as well as the object server. And there are some new plugins within 411, which is a compatibility check that is against the object server you're trying to connect, and IT and CM. This is also available in 3.9 as well. Post-NSYM processing as part of the cross-domain visualization feature, and SAE aggregated link as a result of the same cross-domain visualization. You can disable any of them as you feel relevant, but apart from adaptive polling, the other plugins don't have much impact in terms of performance or resources. Okay, so the poller on the backup, in previous versions, if you look at 3.8 or 3.9, even though it may be in standby mode, when you try to dump the list of monitors it's doing, it will show a list of all the entities it has, but whereas in 4.1.1, the list would be empty. So it is in standby mode, it's not going to show anything there. The backup poller would never utilize the SNMP stack security info, that is the passwords that you defined in the discovery configuration. It never uses that because you are having a shared NSYM database. It has all the credentials coming from the primary. So it reads all the data from the primary, from the NSYM itself. And then you have the poller capacity. If you want to know how much a poller can handle on a given network, probably you can send a request to our performance team. They can share the performance metric guide with you. But you can run the short-term ITNM poller script. This was new in Fixpack 4.3.9 and in 4.1.1. You can run the script that relies on a log file called ncp poller/domain metrics. That file, it will tell you how your poller is doing in terms of health, scalability, and performance. If it is falling behind or it's doing appropriately as expected as per your frequency set. And I put in the last minute this particular diagram, very bottom one. Someone asked a question before the session. What is the default failover time when the primary goes down? The default interval is 5 minutes. You can modify this to whatever frequency you feel like. I think the lowest we have tried is 120 seconds. I think anything lower than that, unless you have a very strict SLA, I wouldn't recommend trying a failover and failback lower than that value. And then the directory or file structure that we copy from primary to the backup, we scan for the changes. That interval is 100 seconds. You can increase or decrease based on how frequently you are making changes to your configuration. I think 100 seconds is reasonable, but you can modify as needed. And in terms of the limitations, it's the same drill. The discovery can be only run on the primary ITNM server. But if anybody is interested to run on the backup as well, feel free to contact me. It is currently unsupported. I can share a document that you can deploy. We do have a few customers who run discovery on backup servers for various reasons, such as disaster recovery and whatnot. The Topoways, which is the ITNM GUI component, doesn't support the load balancing feature. That is still there in 4.1.1. If you want to see the list of all limitations, you can read that docs link listed there. And if you're interested on the 3.8/3.9 high availability setup instructions, they are listed here. And there is a header, how to set up a DB2 header, a YouTube video that was posted by my colleague here. And then if you want to know all the usernames and passwords used by ITNM, I posted a link on the DW answers. You can read that one particularly there. That brings to the end of the slide walkthrough. I'll now look at the questions if we have any. Okay, I'm going to bring here the list of questions. While using Jazz, how do we integrate? Okay, did I miss any questions? Okay. How do we integrate both into the dash? Okay, so in 4.2, we are getting rid of the tip, so we will all be in the one panel. But right now, you have to have the plugin, so it calls from the Jazz to invoke the tip portlet from dash to tip and tip to dash and so forth. I have the instructions. Well, it is already documented, but I can share a few best practice guides people wrote on the developer works. I can share that offline. The second question is, will you be able to get access to the presentation? Yeah, you should be able to. Okay, that's answered. Okay. When deploying a full multi-tier architecture, which object server should we use to connect HA? It's always an AG layer, not the collection layer. That's the best practice so far we have seen in the field. Did failover will affect if we disable any omnibus trigger like deduplication or clear? Okay. Deduplication should not have any impact, or the clear automation should not have any impact. That's the reason being it looks at the last timestamp. It is just that you have health check events piled up, but we look at the last timestamp. So it has no impact. So when is 4.2 GA release plan? That is estimated, ETA is December 2015, subject to change. But the beta for 4.2 is starting end of the month. Will the high availability work on polar level or just the domain level? It is at the polar level. If you follow some of the steps I outlined on the primary, as long as you list the polars as part of your virtual domain dependency list, if one polar fails that you added, say ICMP only or SNMP only, the failover happens, yes. You can modify the dependency list as you feel like. If ITNM should have to run an extended period from backup, is it possible to enable it to run on a discovery? Yeah. So like I said, yeah, I can share the documentation on how to run the discovery on the backup. There are some manual steps. Currently, this is unsupported. Hopefully, they probably make it supported in next release. I can't comment, but I can share the details. Can I also get the links to the user guides related to the Jazz and tip? Yeah, I can send those links. What would be expected release date for ITNM 4.1.1 for ZOS? I have no idea, but I can take that back to the product management and I can feed that back to you. Is our environment, we are seeing some polars events that are having nmos managed state equal to undiscovered interfaces. What it means is probably you have multiple domains and your gateway is trying to process events coming from other domains. It's possible, or the second reason could be you have either syslog or empty trapped events that are trying to be processed by multiple domains. This has been addressed. You want to check your, so if it is coming from other pollers and we are trying to process it, it should not happen. But if it is happening, that means you modified the event gateway schema filter that I defined in one of the slides. You want to check the default filter and see if you're trying to process any other domains. And probably you can restrict to the domain level only. NMOS domain name equal to blah. You hardcode that and take out the NMOS domain equal to not null, null value, sorry. But the second piece is that if you're having the events from syslog or empty trapped events, you may want to hardcode it, the domain name, if you want only that events to be processed by one single domain on a multi-domain scenario. I can also refer to an APAR that we fixed a while ago. That APAR resulted in a new attribute within the gateway schema. You need to enable that attribute. I think I don't remember exactly the attribute name. I think it's a multi-domain or something on those lines, but I can check with you offline on that. We will be running auto discovery of at both primary and backup at the same time. Create any conflict? Yeah, that is not advisable, and you would not run. You would only run the discovery on the backup when the primary is down. With the exception that that is as an alternate method to get your topology up to date. Hence that method. This is the reason why we don't run the discovery on the backup, because ITNM is a event correlation engine based on the topology. So if your network is dynamic, for any reason, if your primary goes down, if you want to bring it back, so yeah, so it's only one discovery at a time. There are certain cases where the discovery is stuck in interrogating devices space. I did not define any scope. It's just a seed based on 5 to 6 devices. There are some troubleshooting tech notes out there to find out which phase of discovery you are in, and then interrogate further which agents are stuck, and then you can interrogate further what devices that are stuck for that agent. I can send you a tech note that is referring that. Or if it is only a few devices, I would expect that maybe if it is a non-root installation, you may have not run the sudo access to some of the key process. For example, when you run the set UID script, it will set the sudo access on the ping finder and so forth, so they can open the raw sockets on the ITNM core. So you may want to check on that. But I can send you that troubleshooting link. And if it is a non-root, you want to execute the post deployment scripts as a root to get the sudo access. The next one is any such cases you have come across, such situations, please let me know your inputs. Okay, that may be follow-up from previous one. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I'll share with you the tech note for the troubleshooting, and if it is non-root, then check on those post-installation process. We have opened a PMR with you guys. Okay, I'm not sure which PMR that is, but okay, so you're talking about the undiscovered interfaces. Yeah, I will review that with the appropriate engineers. I'll get you some feedback on that. How can we rediscover the device if the device is rebooted? Well, the gateway has a plugins. One of the plugin is the Disco. You can have the gate to do a partial rediscovery upon seeing any cold traps or other traps that are of interest. You may have to do some tweaks. Nick Ho wrote a document on what are the changes you need to make. I can point you to that link where you can enable the partial rediscovery coming from Gateway plugin. Okay, that completes the Satish questions. In case of a DR scenario, A DB2 would also reside beside each ITNM. Depending on the distance, HIDR setup would be fully async. What and updated? What and what frequency the data is updated to the DB2, and what is the impact of sites spread across long distances, thousands of miles away? So I think we do have few customers. We definitely have few customers where their database are spread across WAN, and their even ITNM core and the database is spread across WAN in some scenarios. The impact is when the model is trying to migrate to NSIM, it takes a very long time. So you would want to go with a distributed ITNM setup. What it means is you would split the model process from the ITNM core and run close to NSIM database. So that's the one setup. Obviously, the polo startup time would increase. It won't come in minutes. It will probably take longer than that. The customer I know is taking about 10 minutes. We have done major improvements in Fixpack 439 and 411, where we have taken the overhead of the polar and passed it to model. So with that changes, the polar startup time should be pretty significant. But if you need more details, or if you have a scenario that you want to discuss, feel free to send me an email. I can walk you through the details. How to ensure NSIM HA considered I have HA to configure for DB level. You're asking that the NSIM is how to ensure NSIM HA considering I have HADR configured for DB level. I'm not very sure that what the question is, but if you want to make sure your primary is talking to the database that is acting as a primary, that is part of header, you can always query the database and check the header status. That way you know which database is acting as a primary as backup. Again, there are steps involved to configure ITNM core as well as the GUI to talk to the both primary as well as the backup. Those steps are listed in that link I set in the last slide. So you can review that YouTube link to go through the steps, or in the docs. Yeah, thanks Satish for the PMR number. I'll look into that. When is 4.2? Yeah, that's the answer. Thanks. Will you recommend running empty trap as a root or non-root? I think it's a combination of both. We have customers doing both. I would recommend to go as a root for avoiding any sudo access issues or other issues. If you have a restriction to run as a non-root, I guess it's up to your environment restrictions, what you have. I'm also going to bring one more screen here. Let me just, okay. Somebody asked a couple of questions. I haven't put answers yet. So the question was, can we integrate ITNM directly without information broker to Tivoli TSRM? I guess that's the maximum product. I'm not sure what exactly you're trying to ask, but the flow is it goes from ITNM to the omnibus, all the events, and we do have a TSRM gateway that takes the data into TSRM, into the Maximo. If you're asking how we can dictate it directly from ITNM to TSRM, I don't think we have a way there. But whoever asked this question, feel free to send me an email if you need more information. And the second question was how to speed up the transfer of model, or otherwise how to decrease the time of failover and failback. Those two are two different questions. The transfer of model to NSIM, it depends on the speed of the link you have, where they are, where is your NSIM versus where is your ITNM core components, and how you tune your database and so forth. But model does a batch updates of 500 records at a time, and then it commits to it. So as long as your database is tuned and well configured, it should be fairly quick on a, I mean, you do have a profiling scripts that you can run. I can actually put a link there. When I post these slides, I'll add the profiling script, how to run them. There is a model profiling script. It tells about how long it took, and then you can probably work out further, either on the database side, how to tune further. And decreasing the failover failback time, the default time is only 300 seconds. You can modify that in the slide number 24 as detailed. Like I said, less than 120 seconds, I wouldn't recommend. Then it is a too much failover failback flip-flop. I would like to know the rough estimation on the number of devices that a poll can handle. Well, in the lab, I have tested ICMP exclusive about 60,000 interfaces and chassis combined. It could probably cope a lot more. But if you want to know what we tested by performance team, probably you can sign up NDA, and they can share with you the performance guide. That's all I can offer there. But if you are on the older code, get on to Fixpack 439 or 411. It should do a lot better. Is there any option to fail back automatically during outage? I couldn't follow that question. And the last one, what is the topology restriction due to distance between the servers? I guess this is one of the questions in that chat window. Well, it all depends. You can probably make the ITNM core components as a distributed setup, moving the model closer to the database and whatnot.
Well, and the distance between the servers really doesn't matter. What matters is the link between the servers. If you've got a fast link between the servers, it doesn't matter how far they are apart.
Okay, that completes all the questions. Sam or Jen, do you see any other questions that I haven't answered?
Unless I think one might have popped up. The ensure NCIM database is configured. Was that the last one you just answered?
Yeah, so I'll send you that link that is done by Paul Stroud. Probably you can look into that. You can run a few commands on the database, and that tells you who is acting as a primary versus backup.
All right. Well, if there are any additional questions, we will make sure to work with Krishna to make sure those are answered. But at this time, it does look like that is all of them. So thank you very much, Krishna, for your time. I think that was a wonderful presentation and great Q&A session.
Thank you all for joining.
Definitely. And thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. Please do take a few moments to fill out your post-event survey. Your input is very important to us and goes towards all of our future events. But this does conclude today's conference, and you may now disconnect.
Thank you, Sam.
Yep, thank you too.